Hi, I wanted to talk today about understanding wealth creation. So, when I started working way back in 1980, though I had gone to IIT and IIM Ahmedabad, um, I really did not understand wealth creation. And that was, in some ways, a source of anxiety. I used to wonder, however, am I going to buy a car? How am I going to create a good life for my family? And how am I going to buy a house? And so on and so forth. Now, as it transpired, I'm now kind of 64 and I've created a lot of wealth. So in some ways, those fears were quite unfounded. So along the way, I wanted to share some of my learnings with you. But before I do that, a word of caution. You will have to discover your own journey. And if you see this video, please just use it as a starting point. Okay, so with that, let's get started. So, I've shared my screen so you can see an Excel sheet, which is just about one page. And that really encapsulates all my thoughts on understanding wealth creation. So this first table out there, it talks about ACR, which is the annual compounding rate net of inflation. So you can have a negative rate like minus 1%. So that means whatever wealth you have, you are compounding it at minus 1%. So that may be that you hold it in some low yielding things like savings accounts or bonds, which give you a very low rate of return, which is less than inflation. So you end up with a negative net rate. And you can see that over 100 years, this negative 1% destroys 60% of your wealth. So if you start with 1, you end up with 0.4. So if you can get even a 1% real rate of return over inflation, then over 100 years, you will get close to 2.7 times your wealth. And as you move up this table, you can see the dramatic effect of increases in this percentage of real return. So if you could do 5%, then in 20 years, you would almost triple your money, while in 50, you would have 11 times and in 131 times in 100 years. Now, some of you may ask, why are we talking about 100 years? But, this is like an intergenerational thing, because after a certain point, you may create a lot of financial independence and you will not need wealth for yourself, but you're either doing it for society or for future generations, whether it's your own children or the children of the world. That is for you to decide. So that's why 100 years is relevant. Now let's move on to 10%. Now here the thing is dramatic. And at 15%, it's even more dramatic. Now, the only person that I know who has achieved a 15% compounding rate over a 50-year time period is Warren Buffett. And that is why he is regarded as the GOAT, or the greatest of all time when it comes to investing. Trying to get a target of 5% real rate of return should be your first target. But if you become better, then maybe you could try for somewhere between 5 and 10. And you're pretty much done if you kind of achieve that kind of compounding rate. So this understanding of compounding is pretty important, because it could also encourage you to save more if you have a good compounding rate. So for instance, if you could buy a relatively cheap car, or you could buy a relatively cheap house, then the saving that you get from that, if it is invested well, at a good compounding rate, then it could generate a lot of wealth for you. So buying that expensive car or that expensive TV or that expensive ring for your fiance, or spending a lot on that luxurious vacation are things that you should consider. Um, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do any of those because you only live once, but a balance is good. So these things where you spend a lot, and especially if you spend by borrowing and using expensive credit card debt and so on and so forth, then it could be the ticket to wealth destruction rather than to wealth creation. So think about how you spend, how you save, how you invest. Now, what should you invest in? So if you look at fixed income, with fixed income, it's hard to beat inflation significantly because fixed income has no growth component. While stocks, on the other hand, grow with inflation because, like a company, their sales tend to grow with inflation, so do their expenses. But assuming that the company is doing well, their profits also grow with inflation. So you get that kicker. In addition, because of economic growth, you get the growth kicker. And then because of cherry picking, because if you are able to pick stocks or the index automatically picks stocks for you, which are doing better than the economy, then you get the benefit of cherry picking. And you also have the advantages of liquidity. So the nice thing about stocks is that if you decide that you need money, you can sell stocks very easily and get the money in a few days. So other asset classes. Now, it could be commodities, it could be trading, it could be real estate, and various things. It's hard to beat stocks for the average person. Now, you may understand commodities really well, or you may understand real estate really well, in which case you could make fantastic returns doing that. But for the average person, stocks are hard to beat in those things. Now, aside from investing in these kind of things, you could also invest in your own business. You could invest in the next big thing. So if you think crypto is going to be very big, maybe 5, 10 years ago, and you spotted that and you made some investments and then you cashed out maybe at the right time, you made a lot of money. So if you're able to spot the next big thing and you're right, you could end up with the thing. If you could do your own business, then the kind of returns that you could generate if your business is successful are very, very large. Similarly, you could invest in startups, and if you were able to pick the right startup, then it's not your business that will get you huge amounts of money, but you could be joining a startup, you could be investing in startups and make a very large amount of wealth. And for me personally, joining PayPal on the founding team was a big thing in my wealth creation. You could also buy a lottery ticket, right? And maybe, while everybody talks about probabilities and that lotteries being a very bad probability equation, but somebody does win. So that drives a lot of people to buy lottery tickets. And then there have been innovations for people, especially in the lower middle class, who don't have that much access to formal credit, to form things like committees, which end up working quite well for them, unless the committee, the person running the committee runs away and defaults and so on. So there are lots of options, and you have to decide what option works for you, what is the big thing, and maybe a combination of various things. Let's now move on to borrowing. So if you borrow for the right things, and if the interest rates for your borrowing are low, and maybe you get tax advantages, like in a mortgage, for instance, then that borrowing could be very, very useful in creating your wealth creation. However, borrowing is a double-edged sword. So sometimes you can borrow too much, and because you think you're a great trader and you're doing trading on margin, and that builds immense gains, which spurs you to borrow even more till the party stops, and then you lose everything, and you might end up actually in a very bad place. So one has to be careful for borrowing, and borrowing for keeping up with the Joneses or having a very lavish lifestyle is a very, very dangerous thing to do. So you have to be very careful on how you use borrowing to boost your wealth creation. Then protection is very important, and a lot of people forget about it. Now, protection would be one in terms of having an emergency fund. What happens if there's a downturn? If you have all your investments in very risky assets, what if stocks have a huge downturn when you have a downturn? So then you have to sell at a very bad time, and you could end up with a lot of wealth destruction. So how do you protect yourself with having some safe money? And then how do you protect yourself against other risks like health risks? How to use insurance, so car insurance, home insurance, life insurance, and so on and so forth. And when should you self-insure? And when should you use pooled insurance or buy insurance is something that you need to understand and think about. And finally, the importance of housekeeping. So that there are lots of people who do not understand how much wealth they have, and they do not track their wealth, and they don't see whether they're making the right choices or not. They don't have a will. They don't kind of do things which are necessary to keep good discipline on their wealth creation. So they end up doing suboptimal things, and in case they end up dying, then they create a lot of problems for their family and stuff like that. So this latest pandemic, I think one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that it has taught us the importance for everyone, even if they're very young, if they have dependents, if they have a family, the importance of planning and housekeeping and wealth creation in a very disciplined sort of way in there, because you never know what life has in store for you and when your life may end. The last thing, which is probably the most important, which is why I've kept it for the last thing, is basically investing in yourself. Now, this investing could be to increase your skill so that you can earn more. It could be investing in your health so that you don't fall sick and you can be more productive at work. And the most important is investing in your mind, so that, because the mind controls everything. So how can you do all this is something that you should think about. And investing in yourself is probably more important on wealth creation than anything else. So with that, I hope you found this video useful, and hope it'll get you started thinking on your own wealth creation. And with that, I'm going to sign off. Please do share this video with others if you found it useful. Thank you very much.